Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Crowley, and I am one of the owners of Belmont Books in Belmont, Massachusetts. I am delighted to be here tonight to host the Boston.com book club. I want to say thanks to the book club. I think it's so wonderful that Boston.com does this for our community. I am especially thrilled to be working with today the author and my friend Jenna Blum to talk about her newest book, Woodrow on the Bench. So welcome to everyone. And just to straighten out a few details, this is a webinar, so there's no sort of chat or interaction while Jenna and I are talking, but we really encourage questions, and there's a Q&A tab on your screen if you can use that to send in questions. Also, we'd love to hear where you're from, where you're visiting this event from. So if you could share that, that would be great. Let's get started. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Jenna. Jenna Blum is the New York Times best-selling author of 3 novels, Those Who Save Us, The Storm Chasers, and most recently, The Lost Family. And I can recommend all of them. Jenna is also a longtime teacher at Boston's Grub Street Writing Center. She runs a wonderful novel workshop there and other fiction classes. This is how I met her. She's also become, in the last couple of years, the founder and CEO of an organization called A Mighty Blaze. Mighty Blaze is described as a social media marketing company, but I can tell you that it's an organization that puts on great author events, and I would encourage you to learn more about it. Maybe Jenna can tell us a little bit about that. They have a terrific lineup. But we are here this evening to talk about Jenna's first memoir, Woodrow on the Bench. And before we get to the questions, let's let Jenna come on and say hello.
Hi, everybody. I invited myself onto the stage probably earlier than I had to, but that's just how I roll, basically. It's so good to see you, Kathy. Kathy and I have been friends a long time since we met at Grub. Kathy is a physician and a bookstore owner and a novelist and a mom and a wife and all of these good things, and just the pillar of a community. And I'm so grateful to be talking with you about Woodrow.
It's great to be here. So just to get us started, I want to say that we have a lot to talk about, but let's start at the beginning of this relationship. I didn't actually get to say my description of the book, which is that it is a beautiful, heartbreaking, but also uplifting story about a dog, a woman who loved him, the community they created together, and what you describe as, quote, the most durable love affair of my life. I love that description. It's also about loss and, connection and grief. Let's start at the beginning of this love affair, because one of the things I thought was sort of interesting, you grew up with dogs, you especially grew up with labs, but you talk about how there was a little bit of a rocky start to your relationship with Woodrow. And I'd love to hear about that. And also, how you started to find the threads that became so much a part of your connection to him when you first met.
Thank you. Well, as a dog owner, somebody who gets a dog as a puppy isn't necessarily prepared to deal with a puppy. I got Woodrow when he was 8 weeks old from a breeder in Duxbury, Massachusetts, which is near Cape Cod. And I went to see the breeder and the puppies with my then boyfriend, who said, let's just go see the puppies. And guess what? Nobody ever just goes to see the puppies. Like, you always come home with a puppy. So we came home with this little sack of fur and energy, and that was Woodrow. And I had grown up with dogs. Like, my first dog I had before I was even born, my mom had a vicious Cocker Spaniel that used to hide under my crib and attack anybody who came near, and hide under the Christmas tree and make the tree shake and leap out of the tree and attack people when they came to get their presents. And after that Cocker Spaniel, we graduated to Labradors. So I grew up in a household with 3 full-grown labs, which is kind of like having a lab farm in Montclair, New Jersey, and it was a house of chaos. So you would think I would have been well prepared to have a black lab puppy, but in fact, the first month of Woodrow's life, I spent on my couch, huddled up, Googling how to keep puppy from eating whole rawhide, or like how to keep puppy from eating rug, or like what happens after puppy has eaten whole rawhide. And really, I felt like I was raising Helen Keller before Annie Sullivan got hold of her, because Woodrow was whack. He was like a little Tasmanian devil puppy. And it really wasn't until, I want to say, maybe a year in, when I had read all the dog blogs, because blogging was really big then, and been in a lot of panicky chat rooms and taking him to Angel Memorial Animal Hospital, have his puppy tummy pumped, and all of the mishaps that befall a pup, that I really started to bond with him. And it was because of this daily interaction of me dragging him on his leash, trying to get him to learn how to walk, and teaching him how to sit, and teaching him how to fetch, which meant I would throw a ball for him, and then I would go pick it up while he watched me and thought, what an idiot you are. So finally, we kind of grew toward each other and got used to each other. And after that, we were really inseparable for the rest of his life. Oh, Kathy, your microphone got turned off somehow.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was lucky enough to see you two together, and that bond was so clear, and he was such a wonderful dog. But anyway, one thing I also want to talk about is how this is your first memoir. You've written 3 novels, but it's a very different thing to write, about yourself and your own experiences. And I was really struck by the openness and vulnerability around relationships and, things like that. And 2 points that really struck me, and I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about them. One is at the end of your marriage, when you had what I think you described as a summer of sort of invisibility, and feeling like, you were suddenly, kind of alone. I mean, you had decided to end the marriage, and in some ways were kind of choosing between your work, which is a kind of solitary endeavor, and romantic love, which is, very appealing, but it didn't seem like the 2 things were working well together. And I was really struck by how open you were discussing that. And then also the other point where I really felt that was when you talked about the loss of your mom, and, how that brought up all this sort of feelings of, connection. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that experience, being so open about your own vulnerabilities on the page, as opposed to writing in somebody else's story.
Yeah, really good points and really good moments to choose from Woodrow on the Bench about what that vulnerability really is and how I spotlighted that. It was very uncomfortable, actually, at first. When you are a novelist, or when you write fiction, which I had been doing since I was 4 years old, you're disguising your emotions and your own experience in fictional characters and situations. And so you're always wearing this kind of disguise, and that's a protection against the world. So you are really, I think I write from emotion and things that mean a lot to me, but you're hiding that. When Woodrow, and in any memoir, when you write that, what connects you to the reader is vulnerability, the vulnerability that you mentioned. And I have called it showing my underpants, that like as a novelist, you hide your underwear. And as a memoirist, you're supposed to show it, because it makes everybody else feel better that they too have this disgusting underwear, like not the, Victoria's Secret date night, lazy boy short underwear, but it's like, my granny pants, I've been wearing them for 6 days. Like they're all stretched out, the elastic, whatever, like what you don't want to wear when you get in a car accident, like your mom always warned you. And we always have these, and we all have them together, and we feel less alone. So I actually, when I first wrote Woodrow on the Bench, it was mostly a memoir about a dog, and my dog, and the last 7 months of his life, and what it was like to care for a really beloved, very heavy animal who had a lot of physical infirmities, and what that taught me, that sort of bridge between his young, healthy life and then his crossing the river, as it were. And my friend Mark, who is our thoughtful bro interviewer on A Mighty Blaze, read that early draft, and we were talking about it, and encouraged me to go deeper, and said, like, JB, the invisibility that you mentioned, Kathy, he said that should really be front and center, because to look at you, people think you're this very successful author who has a lot of friends and has this very wealthy life. And I do in many ways. And it can also be very lonely to be an author. And I had chosen not to have kids to concentrate on my career. So he made me put that sort of front and center in the book. And at first I resisted, and then I realized he was totally right. So it was liberating to write about that summer of invisibility. When I've been out on the road with Woodrow on the Bench, readers have said that it's their favorite part of the book. It's the one they read back to me most often from audiences. And that lets me know that maybe other people also have felt invisible in their lives, and the book acts as a connector, which I hoped it would. And you mentioned my mom, who passed a few months before Woodrow got his congestive heart failure diagnosis. And her death overshadows in some ways the experience that I had with Woodrow, or acts as a sort of a background shadow, I would say. It's not something that I wrote very much about in this memoir because I didn't want it to be about her per se, but it was very much on my mind, dealing with the grief of somebody so vital and so primal. And then a few months later, having to deal with another creature in your life who is your structure and your joy. And I've heard from many readers also that that experience is common to them as well. They would say, oh, I lost my wife or my husband or my mom or my dad. And then 2 months later, I lost the dog, and the dog was so much harder in many ways. So I am happy to and privileged to carry a torch for anybody going through grief and anybody who feels alone, because you're not.
Yeah, I mean, those were really beautiful aspects of this book. I was really moved by them, and this is about you, so I'm not going to keep talking. But around those issues, could you talk a little bit more about the community of Woodrow, and how he kind of, as I said in the comments I wrote about this, you're a very social person, and you're right. I mean, you have so many friends, you have so many connections. At the same time, you've chosen a life that's really solitary in a lot of ways, and some significant amount of solitude is necessary for it to work. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how Woodrow helped with all that.
I would love to. And I love the comments. I love that you wrote this about me in the article. I'm like, yes, only a friend would see this, and only somebody as perspicacious as you would see this and comment on it. But it's true. My profession requires a lot of solitude, and my personality requires a lot of socializing. And oddly, partly what taught me that was the pandemic, because I was socializing on screen more with people who work for my company, for Mighty Blaze. But also it put an inflection point on the fact that, like, you can be in an apartment by yourself during a pandemic for 18 months. I mean, that is a terrifying prospect. And so I thought, oh, I really, really need my dog to help join me to outside communities. And that was something that Woodrow taught me before the pandemic. So you know this, Kathy knows this. Woodrow has been a part of my social life ever since I got him as a puppy. He was extremely well socialized because he was raised in downtown Boston. When he was 8 weeks old, I had him on the streets of Beacon Hill. And we once went 1 block and counted 43 people who stopped us and said, oh, can I pet your puppy? So he was surrounded by love and people admiring him since that really early age. And of course, he grew up thinking like he deserved that. And he was like, hello, everybody, it's me, the Woodrow. He spoke kind of like a combination of Barack Obama and George Clooney. And that was kind of like the magic that was Woodrow. And he drew people to him like a magnet throughout his whole life. And whenever I had parties, like writer parties in my apartment, I would cram, 50, 75 people into this apartment, including Kathy and her husband, who are both co-owners of Belmont, and liquor them up. And Woodrow would walk among everybody in his tuxedo collar, and just kind of greet everybody and look for hors d'oeuvres to fall from the sky. So he was an incredibly social dog. And throughout all of the relationships I had in my life, many of which were long and almost durable, but not quite, he really loved all of his dog dads and his dog uncles. And then when they were not there, he was still there. So the last 7 months of Woodrow's life, when he was not very mobile, because as an old lab, his back legs didn't work very well, I would carry him in a harness called a help him up harness that made him into sort of a canine suitcase to the bench across the street from our apartment, where he would do his sniffs and then hold court with his elegant cross paws and his Woodrow big smile, which had only like 4 teeth left in it. And he would wait for people to walk down this path called the Commonwealth Mall toward us. And invariably they did. And it was friends and neighbors and then strangers all came to keep us company on the bench. And that was the Woodrow effect. It was kind of like Humans of New York, But it was more like humans of Boston and everywhere else in the whole world who love dogs. And I was surrounded by people all the time. So he became part of my community, and then he became my community.
Yeah, I loved reading about that. And I also loved how you indulged him, especially at the end, all his bacon and his treats. And that's the way to do it. There's two other things that are sort of more complex pieces of this that I wanted to mention. And you can talk about either or neither. One is you talked about how, as he started to struggle, many people encouraged you to ask for help because it's a lot taking care of a big dog like that on your own who is unwell and needs to be carried. And, you describe a conversation with your agent, Stephanie, where she was really encouraging you to do some self-care, and you were a little bit resistant to that. And I loved how, we, the readers, can see the Woodrow effect here, that Woodrow has helped you create this community and people are really happy to join in and help you. So I wondered if you wanted to talk about that. Actually, let's just start with that for a minute. And, as you began to need help with him.
It was really hard for me to ask for and to accept help because I have been raised to a tradition of kind of self-reliance. Like my mom's family were pioneers out on the Great Plains, and my dad's family likewise. It was just a culture in which I grew up in which asking for help was a kind of a weakness, and you just did for yourself. And when Woodrow was in his dotage and he weighed 85 pounds, and I weigh probably about 25 pounds more than that, more with Christmas cookies, but that's how that goes. He was really hard to carry up and down the stairs from my apartment. I had 16 steps from my apartment to my front door, and I got to know those steps extremely well. And just caring for somebody who's really old by yourself is difficult. Caring for somebody very old is hard anyway, whether you're by yourself or not. But there's such a physicality to it and a viscerality to it. Woodrow was not always continent, and I couldn't always tell like if his breathing was worse or it was better. His medication had side effects, and it was just a sort of a wormhole journey that I went through with him from his heart failure diagnosis to his demise 7 months later. But I was really determined to keep him around as long as his nose and tail still worked, and as long as he was happy, and as long as he could enjoy his bench and his ladies and his bacon and his carrots and his hamburgers. And I figured that he would let me know, and indeed he did when his time came. But I did have like maybe 2 people question whether the wisdom of me keeping him alive that long. And I had many, many more people, as you pointed out, Kathy, saying, let us help you. And it was so hard to do that. I felt like, oh, if I let people help me by bringing over like drop cloths to put on the floor in case Woodrow has an accident, then I'm beholden to these people, even if they're my friends, and I can't repay them because I'm caring for my old dog. Like I just don't have any bandwidth left. And over the 7 months, it was this slow but very consistent process of people stepping up and doing more than I even anticipated. Like people helping me get him up the stairs, stopping traffic for us on Commonwealth Avenue. Like you Bostonians know, it's an invitation to get mowed over if you step out into a busy Boston street. Strangers would hold up traffic for us. They would bring us food. People came to write with me in my apartment, as my agent asked me to advise people to do. So they would take time out of their day and drive in from the suburbs to sit with me and my old dog, and we would all write together. People left me like soup and homemade bread and texted me in the middle of the night saying, how is he doing? Is he okay? And it was something that taught me that, I'm trying to figure out how to put this right, that love is really inexhaustible. And it's not a currency. It's not transactional. It's not saying like, if I let you help me, then I have to help you. Or if I help you, then you have to help me. It's more like, you are loved. We will help you. We know you love us. You will help us when we need it. But that's not what it's all about. It's just because love is there. So that's really what Woodrow taught me. You can always depend on that.
That's so interesting because what you describe is in a way what the experience many or most of us have with dogs is that sort of, bottomless generosity. And it's sort of not about what I get, although a treat would be nice now and then. But you know what I mean? It's really this kind of, trust in the connection between you two and feeling of being very happy and wanting to give, as it sounds like your friends really wanted to do during that time. The other point you mentioned briefly, I thought it was so interesting that you described your visit with your friend Julie. And for those of you who haven't read the book yet, Julie is one of Jenna's best friends, longtime friends, who came and to visit during this period and was really concerned about Woodrow and thought maybe it was time for the end for Woodrow. And you were resistant, and that was hard, and it brought up a lot of difficult feelings for you. I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yes. So people ask me this about the book all the time, like, what happened to your friend Julie? And I think expecting that like maybe we had severed our friendship, but on the contrary. So Julie has been my best friend since I met her also at Grub Street, like in the late 90s of the last millennium. And she came to visit for Thanksgiving the year Woodrow was sick. And it was honestly about a week before he passed. So he was really decrepit at that point. In fact, I posted a photo on Twitter and my Facebook and Instagram feeds today of me walking Woodrow in his harness, and Julie took that picture. And you can see that Woodrow is like really kind of like leaning down and kind of drooping down, like he was having a rough time then. And she said, in only the way maybe family or best friends can do, she said, "Puppet," because we call each other Puppet for reasons explained in the memoir. She said, "Puppet, I think he's suffering and I think it's time for him to go." And I was so enraged and thought, how can you say that in front of my dog? He can hear you, like you're damaging his will to live. And I said, "I know he's old. I know he's sick. I don't think it's his time yet. And you have a different attitude about animals. You grew up around horses and grew up on a sort of a farm, and my dogs are my babies." And she said, "You're right, you're right." And it put an inflection point on the fact that it's such a personal decision for every dog parent to make about when you help your dog cross the river. It's really hard to know, and there's nobody who can make that call for you. And I think in some ways, one of the reasons it feels harder than a human death is we don't usually get to do that for our people, but we are responsible for our animals. And I spent so much of my life keeping my dog from harm and keeping him alive and keeping him happy that it felt totally counterintuitive for me to think, okay, now I have to help him die. But what happened was about a week after Julie left, Woodrow got really sick, and I had to take him to the Angel Animal Hospital in Boston. And I knew he wasn't coming back, from that illness, and he knew, and it was really time. And I think Julie was one of the only people who had known me long enough and well enough to say, like, I think you should prepare yourself. When I gave her the memoir to read in a first draft form, she was like, "Oh, you were mad at me? I didn't even know you were mad at me." So apparently, along with my sort of Nordic, like, don't ask for help stuff, if I'm really angry, like, people don't tend to know that. So I guess I did too good a job hiding that. But we're still, best friends. And I am so grateful that she came to visit and stayed with us at such a tough time and told me what she thought and helped me prepare.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was a really wonderful and open comment on friendship, that she was, she could be upfront with you about her feelings, and you could feel angry, even if you couldn't let her know. But yeah, I mean, that's such a hard decision. So what did you learn? I know you lost your dad a long time ago, and your mom more recently, and Woodrow. What do you think you might have learned about grief from going through this process with Woodrow that maybe is different than what you've learned from other losses?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I wanted to just jump back to the friendship for a minute and say that I think lifelong friendships, like your relationships with your animals, are very durable. So my friendships are also these durable love affairs that I have, including with you and including with our friends from Grub. The grief question is so interesting. I wrote a piece for Zibby Owens' Mom Don't Have Time to Grieve about this question of grief. I think what Woodrow's death taught me more than anything, and sort of showed me was not an accident, is that every grief is very different. So when I lost my dad, I was in my late 20s, and I felt like I was a daddy's girl. So I felt like I should spend the rest of my life wandering in a desert and wearing black and like tearing my hair and weeping. It was a very, very painful death. And my mom's death was numbing. And I just felt sort of bewildered when she went like Bambi after the forest fire. Like, where did my mom go? Even though I knew that it was coming because she died from breast cancer. So I had seen her death coming, but it was still quite confusing. And I just felt like she's not here anymore. And you could say, okay, one of those is the norm and the other one is not the norm. But Woodrow's death was different again. And I knew before he went, because he was my daily structure and my access to a dog parent community and my laughter and my joy, dogs are so silly and he was no exception, that his death would dismantle me in a different way. And it did. And for the first 48 hours after we put him down, I was inconsolable. And my friends came to sit Shiva with me basically in my apartment. Like people came and like watched over me and tried to help me eat, and I couldn't eat. And they, tried to help me hydrate and I couldn't drink. And they basically just stayed with me and kept me company. And when that very first fierce, intense mourning period was over, I realized that Woodrow's death taught me you can survive a storm of that intensity, even when it feels like it's sort of taking you apart at your emotional joints, like you do come out of it. And again, your community will be there. And that was so extraordinary to me that people came and showed up for me and nobody said he was just a dog, like, just get over it. Like, what's the matter with you? Like, people bought flowers and cards and candles and plants and food and, just like you do with a human who you lose. So Woodrow taught me about durable love and about surviving a super, super painful parting.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I really loved reading about how you went through that, as painful as it was. Another thing that just reminded me of, there's one little scene that struck me when you're worrying about how he's failing, and I think you were in the shower or something, and but all he keeps doing is shooting the ball out for you to pick it up and throw it back to him. And that sort of, thing about an animal. I mean, I'm sure on some level Woodrow knew he was ill and maybe coming to the end of his life, but he's kind of like, yeah, well, we're here, let's play ball, and I loved how you presented him that way, as the one who reminded you to kind of live in the moment.
I think dogs do that for us, right? Like Woodrow's perspective, and Woodrow had his own Facebook page, which many people followed for many, many years, since like 2005, maybe. And I got on Facebook because of Woodrow. There was at that point something called dog books. So you could create your own profile and then you would create the dog profile. And I didn't want Woodrow to be unpopular. So I created his profile on dog book and then Facebook, and he had many followers. And his whole Facebook feed, which he continues now after his death, and Instagram and Twitter as well, is about the foibles of humans and about how we don't pay attention to the right things, right? So it's just like, oh, mama was like promoting her book and she could be playing with the ball, or she could be talking about me, or she could be feeding the dog, or the dog is starving and the dog needs to go out. And it's true that I would be looking at him and saying, oh my God, you're 10 years old, you're 12 years old, you're 13 years old, your teeth are falling out, you have like white fur on your back now. When did that happen? And he would be like one of those tennis ball machines that ejects a ball at you really hard. And he would shoot a ball at me from across the room and be like, Mamu, that has not happened yet. Get over it. It is time to play ball. And also, I'm starving. So I feel like because dogs live in the present and they're not thinking about the past because they don't care, and they're not thinking about the future because it doesn't matter, they're actually very Buddhist. They're like, just enjoy the moment. There is always time to play with a ball. And there's always another piece of bacon you can eat. And I just think it's such a valuable perspective, even though I don't always achieve it, but your dogs always will.
That's great. Well, I put my little timer on because I didn't want to forget to make sure we got to the questions. And there are some questions. And just to take them in order here. Just to let you know, people are from Beverly, Mass, and then Arizona. But Michelle, who considers herself a Kansan at heart.
Oh yeah, Woodrow well also.
And the first question I have is from Anissa in South Carolina. What is your favorite story to tell about Woodrow?
Oh my gosh. Hi, Anissa. Anissa comes to all my events. She's like my fangirl extraordinaire. And I have to figure out like a way to ship her some Woodrow cookies with bacon in them. So thank you, Anissa. What's my favorite? That's hard. I don't know. Like, what do you think, Kathy? What is your favorite Woodrow story?
I don't know. He was just so charming.
He was really charming, right? There's a reason we called him the George Clooney of dogs. I think I'm trying to think of something Anissa has not heard about Woodrow yet, and she probably has heard this, but I will think about all those parties that we had at my apartment that you came to, and that Woodrow was wandering around in his tuxedo collar, and how he could con people into going into the kitchen with him and opening the refrigerator and opening the crisper drawer so that he could get carrots out of the crisper drawer. He would stick his head in like it was a trough and back out, and he'd have like 5 carrots sticking out of his mouth like this at once. And people bought him like bags of carrots. And in fact, after he was gone, people bought bags of carrots like to his bench across the street from my apartment. So I think, if you're going to tell a story about a lab, that story has to be about food. And even though Woodrow had a sort of genteel way of scamming food out of people, he was all lab in that way.
That's great. That's a great story. Then from Bruce Gilbert, who wants to thank you for your book plate and tell you that he loved the book, and also ask, what are you reading and working on next?
What am I reading and working on next? So right now, oh my gosh, where is it? It's under my laptop. I'm going to pull this out. And now I'm going to look like I'm sinking down because I just pulled a book out from under my laptop. But I am reading Jennifer Hayes' upcoming Mercy Street, which is coming out in February 2022. She is one of my favorite authors of all time. She's also a Bostonian. So if you don't know Jennifer Hay yet, you should get to know her. She wrote Baker Tower and Faith and Three Mrs. Kimball's. And this one is about a woman who works at an abortion clinic and then people who are adamantly opposed to the abortion clinic. So it's a very brave kind of hot button book. And I love it, as I love everything that she writes. And I'm also listening to Jodi Picoult's Wish You Were Here, which is about a woman who gets stranded in Galapagos Islands during the pandemic. So it's both a pandemic book and an escape book. So if you want to read about the pandemic, you can, but in a way that takes you to a desert island. So what could be better than that? Nothing. And what am I working on? Right now, I'm just wrapping up the Woodrow tour. So I haven't started sitting down at my desk yet to write. And for a while, I wanted to write a book about Henry, my new black lab, called Pandy Puppy. Puppies are a-holes was the byline of that book, because puppies are hard to train. But I think I'm probably going to go back to historical fiction. So.
Okay, and you're going to leave it mysterious like that.
I have to, yes, mystery. Stay tuned, I guess is the answer.
Okay, stay tuned. I like that. Michelle Martin wants to comment that the Woodrow was a chick magnet, which is so true.
Indeed, he was.
And Sharon is sharing that she loves the Facebook page and all the pictures. A different Sharon. Oh no, maybe the same Sharon. Sharon Person says, "Hi from Minnesota. How did you come up with Woodrow's name?"
That is such a great question. Hi, Sharon. So I saw Sharon a few weeks ago at a Minnesota event in Stillwater for Pamela Klingerhorn and Valley Booksellers, which is called Literature Lovers Night Out. And I was so grateful that she came out, even though it was cold. And she got to meet Henry in person or in dog. So how did I get Woodrow's name? Woodrow was named after the cowboy character Woodrow Call in Lonesome Dove, which is Larry McMurtry's cowboy saga that won the Pulitzer Prize. And this was a book that is one of my top 3 favorite books of all time, and was one of my family's favorite books too. My mom and my sister and I used to fight over the other cowboy character, Gus McCrae, who was kind of a rascal Texas Ranger. And so when I was growing up, one of our 3 labs was named Gus, after Gus McCrae. And so when I got Woodrow, it seemed only logical that I should name him Woodrow, and that it would mold his personality to be the strong, silent, handsome cowboy type, which actually he became, although he was a little bit more like ambassador than cowboy, I would say. But when he was young, he was a cowboy. So that's who Woodrow is named after.
That's a great story. And I read that book because you loved it so much. It's such
a great. Did you love it?
Yeah, I did. I did love it. Michelle Martin wants to mention that she totally loved the Woodrow hiking on the Kansas prairie and discovering the super secret boneyard. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
I can, certainly. So Michelle Martin, who you should also follow on Facebook, is a Kansan historian who now lives in Arizona. But when Woodrow and I were living for 3 years in Wichita, Kansas, we went to visit Michelle at the Little House on the Prairie site where she was a history reenactor. And Woodrow loved exploring the ranch around. Hold on one moment, please. Jim, can you not do that right now, please? Sorry. Where she was a historical reenactor, and Woodrow explored the ranch. And one hour he disappeared, and he came back and he had like a whole cow spine in his mouth, which, being a lab, of course, he was eating with great enthusiasm. And I immediately Googled, what happens if lab eats cow spine, and found out that he could get mad cow disease. So then we had to abridge our visit to the ranch, and I ran him back up to his vet in Wichita, who saw him many times for just these kinds of emergencies, and maintained that he was fine. So labs can even eat cow spines on a ranch and be just fine.
It's good to know. Good
Yep.
to know. And I think this might be the last question that we have waiting. Margot Steiner wants to say or to ask, when you love a dog or pet so much, is it difficult to love the animal that follows him or her in the same way or to the same extent? Do you find yourself subconsciously comparing them?
Not even subconsciously. Great question, but consciously comparing them. Before Woodrow passed, I was already thinking and feeling quite disloyal about it, that I would need to get another dog because we're all dog people in my family, and I just did not want to be without a dog. And so I was looking at where could I get my next lab pup. And I was fretting about, was it too soon? And would I love the new dog in the same way? And the question was answered for me by my friend Jacqueline, who's in the memoir, who's a beautiful bodybuilder who has an MFA in poetry. And she also had a young black lab when Woodrow was old, and her lab was named Rizzo. And one day she was keeping us company on the bench with Rizzo and Grandpapa, as he called Woodrow. And I asked her, how soon did you get Rizzo after your old dog passed? And she said, a month. And she said, many people will tell you that is way too soon. But for me, it was important. I was having panic attacks without my dog, and I really knew I needed a new dog. So you have to make the decision when it's right for you, in the same way that you have to decide when it's time for your pet to cross the river, and nobody else should decide that. But she said, you will think your new dog is weird. And that's true. Like when I got Henry, I did think he was weird because he's a young black lab, looks a lot like Woodrow, doesn't act like Woodrow, and has a very different personality. Like Woodrow never made much of a sound, and Henry does lots of great grunts, like like these sort of James Earl Jones, like very low grunts, and yo-yo yawns, like kind of yawns that Woodrow didn't do. He's very silly. And if Woodrow was like a gentleman in a dog suit, Henry is like a dog in a dog suit. Like all he wants to do all day is like mash into you with his head, and eat things like dead things and poop, and play with other humans and dogs. And that's pretty much it. And he's like very athletic and very sweet. And so I still find myself kind of comparing like, oh, Woodrow didn't do that. And Woodrow was a tough act to follow, of course. But I love Henry a lot in all of his silliness. And I'm still getting to know him because he's only about a year and I want to say 8 or 9 months. But I love it. Like it's a privilege to get to know him more. So you can always make room for more love in your life is my comment about this situation.
It's a great answer. That is all the questions that we have. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you wanted to share with people about this book or about Woodrow or Henry or anything?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. Buy books, I guess is what I want to share. Also, get dogs. Like there are a lot of dogs right now, especially after the tornadoes last week. I know people are looking for homes for those dogs who need to be rehoused. But I would say if you're thinking about getting a dog, do get a dog. Make sure you're ready to get a dog. But they just bring so much joy. And Woodrow on the Bench is about grief and loss, as we've been talking about. But for every anecdote about Woodrow getting older or about grief, I made sure to include an anecdote from his young life too, about the pure joy that dogs bring and the ways they make us laugh, and his misadventures and his adventures. So I hope that the book brings people joy this season and into 2022, as well as a sort of catharsis. If you've lost somebody or a people or an animal, this is a good book for you, I humbly think. But also support your books and support your indie bookstores, and please buy books. Like, keep the indie bookstores afloat, keep Belmont afloat, and buy Woodrow at Belmont if you're local. And even if you're not, you can order it online. But I have seen for the last 2 years during the pandemic how people have supported authors and supported books and supported bookstores by continuing to buy books and to read. And it's never been more important. And I think not just for the industry, but for ourselves, because we all need stories to keep us afloat, especially when the news is so awful. Like, we need fiction to escape to, and we need memoir to help show us how to get through difficult times. So I hope that wherever you are and wherever you're watching from, whatever your situation is, that you turn to books to feel happier and less alone.
That's a great message. Thank you, Jenna. And I just want to say, as a bookstore owner, it's been really wonderful, the kind of support we've gotten from our community and from not just people close by, but often across the country who hear something about us, and we all really appreciate that. And I do think, this is my 2-minute medicine pitch, which is reading actually has an incredible effect on lowering stress levels. I mean, it's not just me saying this. This is documented through scientific studies and everything. It really lowers blood pressure. It brings your stress level down in a very short period, quicker than walking, or quicker than many things that people think of as stress relief. So I'll just add that in. So reading is wonderful. Reading novels like Jenna's 3 novels, which are all wonderful, if you haven't read them, and this memoir. And I will close with one more question. First of all, I want to say thank you for writing a memoir when you are older than 18, because it seems like that's like the common thing is, okay, I'm 18 now, I'm going to write a memoir. Would you think about writing another memoir?
Yeah, I would. I love writing memoir. I really do. I think that the key to writing a memoir is to have a containable situation, right? And I've lived through a lot of big dramatic situations, but they didn't feel contained in a structure for me. So I would be looking for a situation that was like Woodrow's last 7 months. It was such a neat basket to put my love for him and being able to help other people through that kind of situation within that structure. So I would be looking for something like that. But now that I've crossed over to the dark side of showing my underwear to everybody and being a little more confessional and more vulnerable and more honest, there's something very bracing and liberating about it. And I hope that if people love Woodrow on the Bench, it encourages them to seek out more memoir, because I think it's the way we all hold hands with each other. 18 or no? What makes you think I'm not 18? I have my touch up my appearance on.
Yeah, well, it was just based on how you look, but
whatever.
Yeah. I've known you. Well, thank you, Jenna. That was really great. It's really fun to talk to you and to hear about this book. And I hope everybody who hasn't read it yet gets a chance to read it soon, because it's a wonderful piece of memoir. I don't think we have to do anything else, in terms of Boston.com, except to say that thank you to everyone at Boston.com. This is a great thing for our community to have. And I am looking forward to coming to the next one as an audience member.
Same.
Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you, Kathy. And thank you, Belmont and Boston.com and Silver Unicorn and the Boston Globe and all Bostonians and everybody watching everywhere. Thank you so much for taking time to hang out with us this evening.